The Pentagon owns an Arctic base in Greenland that officially doesn't exist, and what happens there could reshape global power in the next decade. Right now, buried beneath hundreds of feet of ice in one of the most remote locations on Earth, American forces operate a military installation that most government documents refuse to acknowledge. And in a moment, you'll see why this frozen outpost might be the most strategically vital piece of real estate the United States controls anywhere on the planet. You've been taught that Greenland is just ice and polar bears, a massive frozen wasteland with no real significance beyond climate research and Inuit villages. But that mental map you're carrying around is dangerously incomplete. The truth is that Greenland sits at the crossroads of three continents, commands the only deep-water passage between the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, and provides radar coverage over the entire northern approach to North America. Military planners have known this since the Cold War, and they've quietly maintained a presence there that most citizens never hear about. Here's where it gets wild. In 2019, when a certain American president floated the idea of purchasing Greenland, the media treated it like a joke, a bizarre real estate fantasy from someone who didn't understand international relations. But defense analysts weren't laughing. They understood something the public didn't. Greenland isn't just strategically important. It's becoming exponentially more valuable every single year as Arctic ice melts and new shipping routes open up. And the Pentagon has been positioning itself there for decades, long before anyone was talking about climate change or new polar trade corridors. Let's establish the geography that makes this island so crucial, because most world maps lie to you about Greenland's true position. On a standard Mercator projection, Greenland appears roughly the size of Africa. In reality, it's about 14 times smaller. But here's the twist that military strategists care about. Greenland's actual location creates something called the Guyuk Gap, the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom Gap, which is the naval choke point between the Arctic Ocean and the Atlantic. Every Russian submarine trying to reach the open Atlantic has to pass through this corridor. Every long-range bomber approaching North America from the north flies over or near Greenland's airspace. The island essentially functions as an unsinkable aircraft carrier positioned exactly where you'd want one, if you were defending North America or monitoring northern maritime routes. Now, most people have heard of Thule Air Base, the official American military installation in northwest Greenland, about 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Thule isn't secret. It's been there since 1951, currently houses about 600 personnel, and operates crucial early warning radar systems that scan for incoming missiles. That's the base the Pentagon talks about. But Thule is just the tip of a much larger presence that includes remote radar stations, weather monitoring sites, and research facilities scattered across Greenland's ice sheet, many of which operate under scientific or NATO designations that obscure their true military function. During the Cold War, the United States actually built an entire city beneath Greenland's ice called Camp Century. This wasn't some small outpost. It was a nuclear-powered underground base designed to house 200 soldiers indefinitely, complete with living quarters, laboratories, and even a theater. The official story was that Camp Century existed for ice core research and Arctic survival testing. The classified truth, declassified decades later, was Project Iceworm, a plan to deploy 600 nuclear missiles in tunnels beneath the ice sheet, creating a distributed launch system that the Soviet Union could never destroy in a first strike. The project was eventually abandoned because the ice moved more than engineers anticipated, making stable missile silos impossible. But here's what nobody mentions. The infrastructure expertise gained from Camp Century, the knowledge of how to build and operate beneath polar ice, that knowledge didn't just disappear. Fast forward to today, and Greenland's ice sheet is melting at rates that shock even climate scientists. What does that mean militarily? It means rare earth minerals worth potentially trillions of dollars are becoming accessible. It means new shipping routes through the Arctic could cut weeks off the journey between Asia and Europe, making whoever controls those routes incredibly powerful. It means that the continental shelf beneath the Arctic Ocean, which multiple nations are now claiming for oil and gas rights, becomes an increasingly contested zone. And it means that Greenland, which is officially a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, but whose indigenous government increasingly wants full independence, becomes a prize that multiple superpowers are quietly maneuvering to influence. China has been particularly aggressive in this chess game. Chinese mining companies have attempted to purchase closed mining facilities in Greenland. Chinese construction firms have bid on airport expansion projects. The Chinese government has offered to open an embassy in Nuuk, Greenland's capital city of only 19,000 people, which makes no sense unless you're trying to establish political and economic influence. Denmark and the United States both blocked many of these initiatives, but the pattern is clear. China understands what most people don't, that Greenland is the keystone of Arctic dominance, and whoever has meaningful presence there has leverage over future northern trade routes and resource extraction. Russia, meanwhile, has been militarizing its Arctic coastline at an unprecedented rate, reopening Soviet-era bases, building new ports, deploying advanced missile systems, and conducting massive military exercises in frozen conditions. The Northern Sea route along Russia's Arctic coast could become one of the most important shipping lanes in the world as ice retreats. Guess what's positioned perfectly to monitor and potentially interdict that route? Greenland. The island provides line-of-sight surveillance and strike capabilities that landlocked Arctic nations simply cannot match. So where does this leave the Pentagon's current operations? Here's where the story gets deliberately murky. After Camp Century was abandoned in 1967, the United States supposedly mothballed its extensive under-ice operations. But did it really? Freedom of Information requests and leaked documents suggest that certain research stations operated by American universities and contractors in Greenland maintain suspicious levels of security, communication infrastructure far beyond what scientific research would require, and personnel rotations that look more military than academic. These installations use scientific cover the same way Camp Century did, conducting legitimate research that also happens to serve defense intelligence purposes. One particularly interesting facility sits on the eastern coast, officially designated as a climate monitoring station. It operates year-round despite brutal conditions, maintains satellite uplinks capable of transmitting enormous amounts of data, and restricts access to all but specifically cleared personnel. Ask the Pentagon about it, and they'll confirm it's a research installation funded through defense research grants. Ask what specifically is being researched, and the answers become vague. Arctic atmospheric conditions, ice dynamics, communications relay testing, all plausible, all convenient covers for signals intelligence gathering, over-the-horizon radar testing, or even submarine detection systems. The thing about Arctic operations is that they're incredibly expensive and logistically complex. You don't maintain year-round staffed facilities in negative 40-degree temperatures, where supply flights can be grounded for weeks, and evacuation is basically impossible during winter storms unless what you're doing there is absolutely critical. The Pentagon doesn't throw money at pointless projects. So when you see American military budgets that include hundreds of millions for Arctic readiness and polar research infrastructure, understand that this isn't just about making sure soldiers can survive in the cold. This is about maintaining capabilities in a region that's about to become the next great power competition zone. And here's the part that should genuinely concern anyone paying attention to global security. As Greenland's ice melts, Camp Century's buried infrastructure is starting to emerge. Along with the tunnels and equipment, there's also hazardous waste, diesel fuel, and low-level radioactive coolant from the nuclear reactor that powered the base. Denmark and Greenland have raised concerns about environmental contamination, but there's a deeper issue. The ruins of Camp Century prove that America once had far more extensive Arctic infrastructure than it currently admits to. What else is buried under that ice? What other installations from the Cold War era are slowly being revealed as glaciers retreat? And more importantly, what modern equivalents might be currently operational under similar scientific cover? Intelligence analysts who study Arctic developments point to a troubling pattern. American military presence in Greenland never actually decreased after the Cold War. It just became more sophisticated and less visible. Instead of massive bases with thousands of personnel, modern operations use small, distributed teams, advanced automation, remote sensors, and dual-use facilities that can pivot from research to defense operations if needed. This approach provides deniability while maintaining capability, the perfect strategy for operating in territory you don't technically control but desperately need access to. The local Greenlandic population, predominantly Inuit, has complicated feelings about all this. On one hand, American military presence brings jobs, infrastructure investment, and development to an incredibly isolated region where economic opportunities are scarce. Thule Air Base employs Greenlandic contractors and pumps money into the local economy. On the other hand, there's deep historical trauma from when the United States forcibly relocated an Inuit community to build Thule in the first place, a displacement that wasn't formally acknowledged or compensated for until decades later. And there's growing concern that as great powers compete for Arctic influence, Greenland's indigenous people will once again become pawns in a game played by distant capitals. This brings us to perhaps the wildest possibility in this entire story. Greenland is moving toward independence from Denmark. Polls show increasing support among Greenlanders for full sovereignty, and Denmark has indicated it wouldn't prevent independence if that's what the people choose. But here's the question nobody's answering publicly. Could Greenland survive as an independent nation without selling itself to the highest bidder? The island has only 56,000 people total, an economy heavily dependent on fishing and Danish subsidies, and virtually no military capability of its own. Independence would require economic partnerships that don't currently exist. And guess who's offering those partnerships? China, Russia, and of course, the United States, which has far more to lose than any other nation if Greenland shifts allegiance. Some geopolitical analysts have quietly suggested that the United States would never, under any circumstances, allow a hostile or even neutral power to establish major presence in Greenland. The strategic implications are simply too severe. This doesn't mean America would invade or annex the island, but it does mean that tremendous pressure, both economic and diplomatic, would be applied to ensure that any independent Greenland remains firmly within the Western sphere of influence. The Arctic outpost the Pentagon never talks about isn't just Thule or some hypothetical under-ice facility. It's the entire island, a territory that America has treated as a de facto protectorate for over 70 years, and has no intention of giving up, regardless of what maps or political boundaries might suggest. So what happens next? As Arctic ice continues its unprecedented retreat, as shipping companies start seriously planning transpolar routes, as mining operations become economically viable in regions that were previously inaccessible, Greenland will transform from a frozen afterthought into one of the most contested pieces of geography on Earth. The Pentagon knows this. Chinese strategists know this. Russian military planners know this. The only people who don't seem to know this are ordinary citizens who still think of Greenland as nothing but ice and irrelevance. The base that officially doesn't exist, whether it's a repurposed climate station, a renovated Cold War facility, or something entirely new that's never been publicly disclosed, represents America's commitment to maintaining Arctic dominance. And in an era of great power competition, when even a few years of advantage in positioning and infrastructure can determine who controls vital choke points and resources, you can bet that commitment isn't going away. In fact, it's probably expanding right now, quietly, under cover of scientific research and climate monitoring, preparing for a future where the Arctic is no longer frozen wilderness, but the next great theater of global competition. If this deep dive into hidden military geography and Arctic strategy got you thinking differently about maps and power, consider subscribing. And here's what I want to know. Would you ever live in Greenland? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. And if you want to explore more about how geography shapes global power in ways nobody talks about, check the link in the description where I break down other strategic locations that don't make headlines, but absolutely should. The Arctic is heating up in more ways than one, and the Pentagon's frozen outpost is just the beginning of that story.